I would like to thank Michael to have invited me. That's a very nice opportunity for me to present these results. Some of them are newer than others, but I try to compile everything and I try to not overkill you with a lot of data. So I hope you won't all be sleeping at the end, but let's try. So it was a project that was run between two institutes, the GEOMA in Kiel and the NIOS, which is an institute in the Netherlands. I've been traveling between the two institutes for 4 years for this project. And so, yeah, I want to take the opportunity to thank all my colleagues from these two institutes as well, without who it would have been impossible to run the project. And so when I present these results, I always like to show this picture from Mike Hedver. And so it shows two Tuareg people looking at, Tuareg people who are living in one of the most arid places on Earth. And they are looking at an engraving of giraffe. And perhaps you noticed, but the giraffes are also on a leash. So there are two giraffes, there's a small one and a big one, and they have a leash. So this was dated back to more or less 8,000 years ago, which means that there has been very different types of environments in the Sahara and even giraffes. So let's have a look at that. So a little outline of my talk. I will first introduce the Nile River. Then, because this is a keynote in this geography conference, I wanted also to talk about the Nile Delta vulnerability. I think it's of most interest for many of you. And then about this, so the Holocene in Northeast Africa, and especially the African humid period. Then I will guide you through the project, so which is called HOSINIL. I made the acronym myself, but I forgot about the meaning. So it's something like Holocene sedimentation from the Nile, or something like that. So the sediment core, the methods, and then 3 different types of results. And then if we have time, a small outlook on another project. So the introduction. So perhaps you know it already, but the Nile is one of the longest rivers on Earth. It's almost 7,000 meters long. It flows from south to north, from equatorial to tropical regions, where it takes its sources, to the Mediterranean. So it's an important link, it's an important connection between the tropical areas and the Mediterranean basin. And as you all know, it has also been a very important place for human evolution and civilization developments. So as I said before, and it's very relevant for this talk, you have to keep in mind that the Nile takes its sources for once down south on the equator, and that's the region of the Great Lakes. That's the White Nile. And then there are 2 other sources that contribute to the Nile flow, and that's the Blue Nile and the Atbara River. I will speak of them as the Blue Nile because you will see they carry a very similar signal. So if we look at the climatic regime, so when we look at the river runoff, we have to look at the changes in the monsoon system because, as I said, its sources are very down south, so they are under the influence of these 2 big monsoon systems, the West African monsoon system and the Western Asian monsoon system. And these monsoonal cells trigger a very large migration of the African rain belt, so that's this green, where we have the most precipitation, and so the African rainfall belt is migrating north to south depending on the seasons. And due to these migrations, the Blue and the White Nile have very different seasonal patterns in terms of river of runoff and of precipitation. And we can see that when we look at precipitation dynamics. So in Addis Ababa on the Ethiopian islands, you see that most of the precipitation is concentrated in the summer, whereas at the source of the White Nile, it's more spread through the year, and there are two wet seasons. And that we can see also in the runoff, so also over the year. Well, the Blue Nile, so B and C are the Blue Nile and the Atbara, and as I already said, they have a very similar signal, and they provide a lot of water to the Nile River, but mostly in the summer. Whereas the White Nile contributes through the year, and especially becomes a very important contributor during the drier months. But shows a little bump here, and it's during this autumn, so the second wet season. So then, why do we want to study this? You know, what kind of information does it give us? For one, and for you particularly relevant, I guess, the fact that the deltas are a key area. They are very populated, and they are very sensitive to river runoff and sediment input. The Nile Delta itself is an extreme case in terms of vulnerability, and that I didn't say, but the IPCC, because it has a very low sediment supply since the building of the Hassan Dam, and because it's subsiding, because the sea level is rising, and because it's very populated. So it is very important to understand how the changes, the climate-driven changes in the river runoff can influence the morphology of the delta. And also that will help us to forecast what might happen in the future. So I wanted to show you this very nice paper from my colleague Nick Mariner. He's been working a lot on that, and at CEREG as well. And basically he took from the Nile Delta many sediment cores, C14 ages, and calculated sedimentation rates. And from the sedimentation rates, he subtracted the subsidence and the sea level rise to get accretion rates. And so he could calculate for 8,000 years, so it's shown here, the accretion rates on the delta, and he could relate that with the changes in the river regime. So he could show that over thousands of years, the river regime has had a very big influence on the delta geomorphology, and also apparently, but you can read the paper for more details, on the number of tributaries. So the African humid period. That's don't take it for granted. This is an artist view, but it gives you a little idea about what we are talking about when we say greening of the Sahara. And so if we have a look at more scientific data, I always like to show this paper of Nick Drake, because he made a lot of maps about fossils that were found in the Sahara and compared it to population dynamics. And here I took the maps for the giraffe, to go back to our earlier subject. And so here, this kind of blue shading represents the historical distribution of the giraffes, what we see now. And all these dots, so they are blue and white dots, and that's either rock art or fossils. And you can see that they are really spread throughout the desert. As a comparison, this is the present day state of the vegetation in the desert. There is none. And also he mapped river fans, lakes, rivers, swamps, everything. So this was a very humid period in the desert, in the present day desert. And then if we want to have a look a bit at the timing, there's this other paper from Cooper and Kröpeling from a few years ago. And it shows snapshots, so reconstructions of paleoprecipitation. So these green lines represent isohyets of precipitations for different time periods. And the red dots are settlements. So you can see that from 10 kilo years onwards, the Sahara was pretty green, and people moved from the river banks to the Sahara to live in. And then as soon as it started to get more arid, everybody migrated back along the banks of the Nile. So it has triggered, I mean, there is a relationship already shown since a long time between the climate evolution there and the human dynamics. Just drinking. Then because I'm a paleoclimatologist, I always like to know why. And why did it change so much? And so one main control, I took this paper especially because I came here to Hamburg, because there might be a few co-authors from this paper in the room, from Tjallingi, because they have provided the model and data. So these are the data and model comparison for this whole time period, and that's more about Western Africa. But it shows basically that one of the main control on this, so it's over the last 120 kilo years. This is our time of interest, and this represents the development of vegetation in the Sahara. This is a humidity index, and as you can see, it's more humid as well. So, and it's principally modulated by the changes in the summer insolation. That's due to the monsoon. So the higher the insolation, the more intense the monsoon, basically. So that's the first forcing. And then that's a compilation of records from Eastern Africa, and I won't detail them all, but basically what you can see is that this is basically all of them are more humid when you go up and more arid when you go down. And this is the transition between humid and arid conditions, so from 10 to 0. They all show this transition, but with very different timings. So even on a region like Eastern Africa, there is a very large variability in the timing of this transition. And so the question has been asked whether there has been some regional processes that could explain this variability. So to sum up, why do we want to study the African humid period in the Nile Basin? Because we want to have a look at the influence of changes in river regimes on the deltaic area, because there has been a very important relationships between human and environmental dynamics, and because we want to investigate the response of the climate and the environment to a slow orbital forcing, such as the changes in insolation, and especially the feedback processes. So to come to the project now, so as Michael said before, the cores were, I first started to work in this West Nile Delta project, and we were working on mud volcanoes. So the big pie that you see here is a mud volcano. They are located on the western part of the Nile Delta, and we took cores in the mud volcano, but we also wanted to compare these sediments to background sedimentation, so we took some cores out as well. And these cores were just absolutely wonderful. So when I saw that, I decided, okay, let's do something with it. They looked like that, basically. They have very fine millimeter scale laminations, like on the picture, very regular. And they have been found already on the delta, and they have been attributed to hyperpycnal deposits of flood layers. So basically, the flood layers come at the surface and reconcentrate themselves and fall down and sedimentate on the bottom, and are therefore preserved. And so we have a record of past floods there. So that was very exciting. We dated it with C14. And it was not easy because the sedimentation rates were so high that we had a lot of reversals. So I modeled it with Bacon, with a small software. And I could get this age depth relationship for the whole core. And basically, the bottom is at 9.5 kilo years, something like that. And as I said, the sedimentation rates are very big. They are in the order of a few millimeters per year, depending on the places, but for the African humid period, definitely. So it indicates that there has been massive river inputs at this moment. So I don't want to kill you with methods, but I've been using quite a few methods. So I have to show you that in order for you to follow. Basically, my idea was to look at three components of the climate and the environment. How did the erosion evolve? How did the river react to changes in the climate? So I looked at that by, I looked at that by looking at the elemental composition of the sediment, so on the bulk sediment. Then we decarbonated the sediment and had a look at the grain size distribution. And then I did also some, that's what I did in Kiel, I did some neodymium and strontium radiogenic isotopes to look at the provenance of the sediments. Then the second thing was to look at the amount of fresh water delivered by the river and how, because this gives an idea about the precipitation rates. And then I took the foraminifera that are living at the surface of the water and looked at their oxygen isotope signature, which gives an idea about the seawater properties, but we will come back to that. And then I wanted to have a look at the vegetation, and then I took some extracts of organic matter, and we had a look in the NEOS at some compounds, like here I will present the N-alkanes, which are coming from leaf waxes, and give an idea about the type of vegetations we had in the hinterland. So the idea was really to look in one core at these different components of the environment and see how they interact with each other. So the first type of results I will show you is from this paper N+1, for which I've been invited, I think. And for this one I used the foraminifera, the N-alkanes, and the neodymium and strontium isotopes. So let's start with the river runoff, so the foraminifera. I will present the results always on a scale from 10 to 0 kilo years ago. And here I plotted the delta weighting of the foraminifera, corrected for sea surface temperature and corrected for ice volume, so that we have an idea about more or less the salinity, but let's say the seawater properties. And they are very sensitive to the amount of fresh water which is delivered, because we are right in front of the river. And so basically if you go up, it's wetter, and if you go down, it's drier. And you can see that it follows very well the changes in the insolation that are this dotted black line here. Then these are the N-alkane carbon isotopes. As I said, it gives an idea about the type of vegetations we had in the hinterland. And so if you go up, it's more grasses. If you go down, it's more trees. That's the theory. I think in this case, it has more to do with the fact that we had the Sahara, which was covered with grasses. So when we have a decrease, I think it's not that we have more trees, but it's that you basically lose all these grasses. They disappear. And then I show you here only the strontium isotope, but the neodymium isotope are very similar. So that's this red curve, that's the strontium isotope. Neodymium are nice because they help to see where the sediments are coming from, but the strontium work very well in that case. So I show you this one. Basically, the highest values here show sediment originating from the Blue Nile, whereas the lowest value represent sediments coming from either the White Nile or the Central Sahara. This is due to the geology. So on the Ethiopian islands, there are these volcanic rocks that are pretty young, so they are more radiogenic. And the Sahara and the White Nile region, so that these are cratons, they are older and they are less radiogenic. And And I also plotted here the sedimentation rates, so that you see the changes in the sedimentation rates. And what we see is that we have very asynchronous changes in these three components. I will interpret that as precipitations, but river runoff is decreasing slowly following the forcing. The vegetation is decreasing much faster, as well as there's a switch as well in the sources of the sediments. So it was proposed by Martin Clausen, I don't know if he's there, but had a paper a few years ago, 2013, that said that perhaps some parts of the vegetation are more sensitive to climate change than others, and that might be the case for grasses, and that might be what we observe here, that the grasses are degrading very fast. And it also showed, so far I can see, that there is no vegetation feedback on precipitation, and that means that when the vegetation collapsed, there has been no collapse in the precipitation. That was a big question, and I think that might give a bit of an answer here. Then the other thing was that I was very surprised to see that. I didn't expect that the vegetation would collapse so fast. So I thought, okay, let's have a look at how did it work for the humans at the same time. And so I compiled some archaeological data from the Sahara, and I realized that when this happened, it's also the time that people started using cattle as domesticates, as a source of food. So we propose that there has been a relationship between this very big, very strong environmental degradation and the beginning of pastoralism in Northeast Africa, which is also later than in other places on Earth. Fine. So to sum up these results, we have reconstructed the changes in precipitation, vegetation, and erosion, and seen that they are asynchronous. This might mean that the grasses are more sensitive than other parts of the vegetation to precipitation changes. There's probably no vegetation feedback on precipitations, and that it might have forced the human populations to change their way of living. Then I wanted to show you also some results from this other paper that was published a bit earlier, in 2013. And this, I focused on the erosion processes and the river dynamics. So this is going to be not very nice. So this is I measured the sediment core with an XRF core scanner, and XRF core scanner are very nice, but they produce a huge amount of data. So either you look at it with your little eyes, or you take some statistical methods to try to analyze them. That's what I did. So we ran a PCA, principal component analysis, on this data, and we could see that there are some elements are clustering together. So we have these are heterogeneous elements, and we can see that we have two clusters, T1 and T2, and then we have also these elements, so calcium principally, but also manganese and strontium, which are more which are indicator for biogenic input. So when we had these results, we decided to use two of these elements, so here the titanium and the calcium, as indicator for river, because these are, other publications showed it, that titanium and iron are mostly brought by the river, and aluminium, silicon are more brought by the dust. So we used the titanium and the calcium as indicators for input from the river and from the background sedimentation in the ocean, in the sea. And then I also ran some grain size analysis of the sediments, and I'm not going to show you the details, but just the same. It's a lot of data, so we analyzed it with an n-member modeling, and we could get out 3 n-members, which give you 3 main grain sizes. So I splitted the sediments in these grain sizes and measured their radiogenic isotope composition to know where they were coming from. And it showed that the coarser n-member is very close to the dust. The middle one, which is silt size, comes from the Blue Nile, and the smaller one is coming from the White Nile. So we can use these n-members as tracers from the sources. So if I combine that now on the plots, so again from 10 to 0, again the insolation, the forcing, and then here is the, so forget the log, just take the ratio. It's a ratio between this coarser n-member, so the dust, and the 2 river n-member. So it's a ratio that looks at the changes between the fluvial input and the dust input. And then the second one is titanium calcium, so it's basically the fluvial input versus the background sedimentation. And we show that this is an indicator for river runoff, and it follows pretty well the forcing. Then I had a look at the changes in the source. So in these 2 n-members that were indicators for the river sources, the Blue and the White Nile. And there I have another, I was also very surprised to see that, but it's a completely different picture. And it shows that these changes in Blue and White Nile contribution, they follow the spring insolation or autumn insolation. So this was an interesting result. And I thought a long time about it, and what I came up with was that it might have been, so the orbital configuration changed during the Holocene. During the early Holocene, we were in an inverse situation as compared to today, so the monsoon was very intense because the summer solstice was at the perihelion. And then at 6 kiloyears, so at the mid-Holocene, the situation is very different. It's the autumn equinox, which is at the perihelion. So the autumn insolation has a stronger influence on the whole insolation. So there is a change in the seasonal distribution of the insolation. And I thought, I'm not sure it's true, but that's one explanation, that because there was an increase in the autumn insolation here, that could have favored the White Nile, which also has, and we know it from today, this wet period during the autumn. And also in the river runoff. So I leave this with a question mark because this is still work in progress. And then I wanted to show you so my results as compared to those from Nick Mariner, so this data from the aggradation of the delta. And he saw it already, but I just wanted to emphasize that the changes that we see in the river runoff indeed seem to have a very big impact on his calculation of the delta aggradation. But the changes in the sources had barely any effect. So to sum up, we reconstructed the changes in the river runoff and in the provenance of the sediment. The river runoff follows the summer insolation, but the provenance follows the autumn and spring insolation. And there has been a very big influence of the changes in the river runoff on the Nile Delta morphology. To finish, I wanted to show you this work. It's in, at the moment in revision in Quaternary Science Reviews, and it's an effort with colleagues from the CEREJ, and especially a modeler. So we used her model output and compared it with my data to try to understand a bit better what happened with the precipitation. So I'm not going to describe that because it's a lot of curves, but I just wanted to show you this is a compilation that I made from data sets in the Nile Valley, and you can see that in many records we find this trend, and in other records we find these trends. So it's not only in my data that it's found, but also in other data sets in the Nile Valley. So we started to wonder why, what happened? Is this really the seasonality? Is what happened? So we used the model of Camille Contou. I'm not a modeler, so I'm not going to go in detail about that. I just know that it's a global atmospheric model. It has no dynamic vegetation, no dynamic ocean, but she has forced the model for the mid-Holocene with SST anomalies from another model, and she has also forced the vegetation to be like the one at 6 Ka using the biome model. It's also, I have to mention that it's also a model which is nice because it's zoomed. It has a stretchable grid, so it's zoomed on North Africa, so it gives a very good representation of the monsoon system. So that's the results we got. So that's in the summer. That's the summer simulations. That's the present. That's the control simulation. Sorry. And that's at the mid-Holocene. So basically what we see is that the model simulates a convergence over the Blue Nile basin, which is shifted northwards, maybe even a bit westwards and eastwards, but is not anymore on the Blue Nile basin, and there's even a negative precipitation anomaly over the Blue Nile during the mid-Holocene. So now she also did some simulations at different seasons. So here is the summer again, and here is the autumn. And you can see that indeed during the autumn there's even a reinforcement of this situation. And the negative anomaly of precipitation over the Blue Nile basin remains. And even when we look at the yearly changes in or monthly changes in the precipitation versus evaporation anomalies, there is a very negative anomaly during the summer over the Blue Nile basin. So it seems that during the mid-Holocene, there were less precipitation over the Blue Nile basin, which might explain the results that I got with this lower Blue Nile input at this moment. So then I come back to this data compilation that I showed you at the beginning, this very large variability in the transition from wet to arid throughout the eastern, northeastern Africa, and they correspond to all these points here. And what was nice with the model is that it could explain, at least we could recognize some of the features we see in the data on the simulations. So, for instance, at the Lake Turkana, which was flowing in the White Nile during the African humid period, and on the Horn of Africa, it's still wet. And indeed, we see that there are still some precipitation here, and here, that's the Lake Turkana. Over the Red Sea, the northern Red Sea here, and over the source of the Blue Nile, it's already very dry. So, well, this is an explanation for a beginning of explanation. I mean, this is still work in progress, so I don't want to go too far because we are still working on that. But yeah, these are the thoughts we have at the moment. So we try to demonstrate that the decrease in the Blue Nile contribution at 6 kiloyears, so at the mid-Holocene, was due to a decrease in the precipitation on the Ethiopian highlands, due to a migration of the convergence, and other features, but I won't go too much in detail here. And there has been sustained precipitation on the Great Lakes region, especially tributaries that are not presently contributing. Then there has probably been a role of the seasonality of precipitation on the change in the river runoff. And finally, I think it's nice because it gives a synoptic view on the precipitation dynamics in this whole region that helps to reconcile some of the variability we see in the climatic records. Do I have time for a short outlook? This is a completely other project, but it has something to do with what I showed you. It was postulated a few years ago in 2008, also perhaps earlier, but I like this paper from 2008 from Anne Osborne, where she analyzed the core here with neodymium and strontium isotope and could show that there has been probably a river that was active, which is not active at the moment, which was probably active in Libya during the last interglacial, the stage 5. And we had the big luck, so it was, because this core is located between the Nile and this Paleo River, it could never be really firmly demonstrated. Now, we went, sorry, I don't have a map, but we went here, and we took cores from this Gulf of Sirte, and these are the cores. So the people who know a bit the sedimentation in the Mediterranean basin will recognize the sapropels, which are especially in these last 3 cores, these dark layers, and this corresponds to moments that the river, there has been freshwater input to be able to produce these sapropels. So that's our next project. We want to look at how this river, so what has it been working following the monsoon? What influence did it have on the Mediterranean basin? We have many questions because it's a region which is barely studied, but that's we hope to do in the near future. Just I show you the magnetic susceptibility correlated to the summer insolation. So it's already a very nice correlation. And it gives us an approximate dating to around 350 kiloyears BP, so we go way back in the past. And that's it. I thank you for your attention. And I want to thank also the people who funded us and all my colleagues at Geomar and NIOS and CEREG. Thank you.